Welcome to another episode of Culturally and Technically Legal, the show where we examine the intersections of culture, law, and technology. Today, we have a very special guest joining us, Mr. Freeway Rick Ross. Mr. Ross is a notable American public figure who is often associated to the 1980s era that many refer to as Reaganomics, the era in which we saw an aggressive war on drugs in America that disproportionately affected black and brown Americans throughout the country through harsh criminal punishments. Without further ado, we'd like to welcome Mr. Freeway Rick Ross to our show. How you doing today, Mr. Ross?
I'm good. Thank you for the introduction.
We're super excited and thrilled to have you speak to us today. Obviously, jumping through hoops that we were able to get you on, and just kind of have a candid conversation of where the intersects of law, technology, and the culture meet. So before we really jump into the nitty gritty of our conversation, we'd like to you give a little bit of background about who you are before, we talk about the drug trade stuff. Obviously you were a black kid coming up in California, like many of us across the country, loved tennis, loved education, and ultimately wanted to go to school to be, a tennis professional athlete or amateur athlete at the college level. Could you talk to us a little bit about your life prior to, what everybody knows you for now as being part of the mega American drug trade?
Well, I always thought of myself as just a normal kid, growing up in the ghetto. Uh, I don't know if people know or not, but in the ghetto, a lot of times, the first heroes we meet are drug dealers, especially once you become like a teenager. Drug dealers, pimps, those are usually the entrepreneurs that are in the ghettos and that are having the kind of lifestyle that I wanted. I wanted the lifestyle of having nice clothes, nice car, nice shoes. Uh, and my first attempt at that was through sports. I thought sports would be my way out of the ghetto. Uh, I never really did well in school. Um, Even though people said I was a bright kid, um, I just didn't fit well in school. Started playing tennis at 12 years old, 12 or 13, maybe in the 12, 13, somewhere right in there. Uh, Fell in love with tennis, played all during high school. And I believe had it not been for tennis, I probably would have been a gang member. I'm almost sure I would have been a gang member. Um, Luckily, at 12, 13 years old, my mom still, she still would put that telephone card on you. So I couldn't be a gang member at that age. And by the time I was old enough to buck my mom's, I couldn't see fighting over a street or a color or anything like that there. It just didn't make sense to me. But when I was 11, 12, cripping was something I wanted to do.
Wow, that's interesting. I think that story, like I said, it rings familiarity, right? I have friends who have went down that path, and just people very close to me, because like you said, it's about exposure at the end of the day, right? These are the people who you're exposed to, who might look the way you want to look or envision yourself, especially when you're trying to escape poverty. Um, and I think you talked about your community a lot. When were you actually introduced to the ability drug selling, distributing, etc.? When did you get introduced to that? Like what?
The first time I ever heard about drugs was a movie called Superfly. One of my older cousins took me to a drive-in theater. Where it was about, I don't know, it was a car full of all of us, cousins, younger cousins, and he would take us to the theater and I guess show us a good time. So he took us to the theater one night, this Vermont drive-in, and when we got there, this movie Superfly was on. I'd never heard of Superfly. I didn't know what it was. But when I saw the movie, I fell in love with the character. You know, this character stood up to the police. He stood up to white men. He didn't take no stuff off of nobody. Uh, and, I said, that's the kind of guy I want to be. I want to be a guy that don't take nothing off of nobody. Don't give stuff to nobody, but don't take nothing from nobody. And I saw cocaine as being his strength. I thought that's where he got his strength from selling cocaine.
Wow, no, that's an interesting movie, and even within that movie, you see so many ups and downs and highs and lows. obviously, he had run-ins with the police officers as well. But that was a different era where there weren't the same drug war, drug law thing going on. How impactful was that Reaganomics drug era, specifically in these Black and brown communities of California, which you grew up in?
I mean, when you look at the whole scenario, it looks fishy. You know, here you got Ronald Reagan uh, declaring war on drugs, and then on the other hand, you got him supporting the Contras, who are actually bringing drugs into the country using military planes, um, using money that the government gave them to buy weapons, and they take them and buy drugs. Or maybe the government gave them the money to buy drugs, and they just say they gave them the money to buy weapons. You know, we don't know. You know, we weren't there, so we can't get to the bottom of it.
And you were saying there was a lot of fishy stuff going on. And one of the things that I see I watch different documentaries and stuff like that, it was almost as if they were able to get away with this harsh punishment and things of that nature due to the stigmatization of, Black and brown and poor people. How much stigmatization weighed into a lot of this stuff that media was producing and calling it a war and, just all the vicious things that happened to, the Black community specifically? What role did stigmatization, you think, played within all of that?
Oh, big, big, big. I mean, they while I was in jail, I learned how to read while I was there, and I spent a lot of time in the law library, um, trying to reverse my case. But not only trying to reverse my case, but also trying to figure out why was I in the position that I was in. What are you doing in prison? While I was sitting there, I was saying that this is not how your mother's son was supposed to wind up. Sitting in a jail cell, looking at a life sentence without the possibility of parole. How did you get here? Why are you here? So I started to do a lot of research. And doing that research, I started to find out things like when they would have a baby on the news and they said it was a crack baby, really the baby was an alcoholic baby. The baby had no crack in their system. And it was only after doing this type of research that I started to become suspicious of the government. And then later on, when the guy who I was getting my drugs from testified that they got $18 million from the United States government, but it wasn't enough money to fight a war, and they took the money and bought drugs with it. He also talked about his boss going on a fishing trip with George Bush Sr. And when he came back off the fishing trip, he told his soldiers that the ends justify the means. So when you start hearing things like this here, you're saying, well, what did him and George Bush talk about on that boat? What was their plan?
Could you briefly describe what your appeal process looked like and the loophole you actually found within that space where they were trying to hit you with a 3-strike law?
Well, what I found out is that you can't be a career criminal in one day. And how that benefited me, because I sold drugs over 8 years. But my criminal spree, even though it was 8 years, it was considered as one day because I'd never been punished. The way this 3-strike law works is you have to go out, commit a crime, go to prison, get out, commit another crime, go to prison, get out. Now you're a 3-striker. You're what they considered a 2-striker. So now if you get a third conviction, you can spend the rest of your life in prison. Well, in my situation, I had never been to jail before in my life. But I was selling drugs all over the country. So 3 or 4 of the states that I've been selling drugs in, once I got arrested by the first state, they started saying, oh, we want him here. We want him here. We want him here. So in actuality, I was only in jail one time, but I wound up with 3 or 4 convictions, if that makes sense to you.
But you were only in jail
So
once, so you weren't
now,
arrested actually on those 3 or 4 other times.
right. I never got out of handcuffs. Once I was in handcuffs, I stayed in handcuffs. So then if you come in and you get another case, then they give you a life sentence. Well, that's not how the forefathers meant it to work. Because, say for instance, we had places in our neighborhood where you could go out and it was $100,000 being made that day. But in order to make $100,000, you probably have to sell to a couple hundred people. Now, each one of those people you sell to is a separate offense, is a separate sale. In the law's eye, those are considered sales. But it's no way that you can be considered a career criminal just because you made 100 sales in one day. You can't be a career criminal.
Right. Yeah. No. It doesn't work like that. It's funny how the law does play with wording in certain ways. Now, you went through this appeal process. Were you using the same lawyer within this appeal process, or because obviously a lawyer can't be incompetent, right? Because that's the reason you didn't prevail in the first scenario, but now you take it to the appeal scenario. Was it a different lawyer? And if it was a different lawyer, what happened to the original lawyer with his level of incompetence?
It was a different lawyer. My first lawyer, he didn't think that my trial lawyer, who was a friend of mine, I've been using him for years and years and years. He's probably the reason that I had never been arrested, because he was always able to get my friends and my colleagues out of jail whenever they got in trouble. In this situation, though, it was kind of over his head, and he didn't feel that I would win my appeal. So he told me to keep my last money. I think I had like $60,000 left, and he said, you should keep that $60,000 and put it on your books, because you're gonna need it. You got a long time to do. And he said that he didn't think he would be motivated to take my case for only $60,000. He wanted more money as well. So I went back to court, and the court appointed me a court-appointed attorney.
Wow. No, that's and it was a court-appointed attorney who ended up helping you win that case. That's I mean, beat on appeal, prevail. That's interesting, because a lot of people don't really understand the importance of these court-appointed attorneys, or they think they get a court-appointed attorney. It's like, oh man, I'm not going to win this now. So briefly.
Well, the thing about a court-appointed attorney, and the problem with with a lot of people is that they don't put the time in themselves. They expect the attorney to do everything. And I was lucky when I got there. I met some older dudes, and they explained to me, even though I was paying my lawyer well, that I shouldn't put all my hope and my confidence into this attorney, because he had other clients, he had a wife, he had kids, and he had other things that was important to him. As for myself, the most important thing to me was getting out of prison.
Right. No, totally understand. And not going to take up too much more of your time, but want to switch gears briefly for a moment. Obviously, there have been other entities, specifically in the entertainment space, that have utilized your name, some level of even your likeness, even your story, right? And there's one particular situation in the music space where you've actually had to take this case to court, and you've appealed it on multiple occasions, taken it to a higher court, and still no justice prevailed in someone utilizing your name. So now we talk about like copyright infringement or trademark. You didn't necessarily prevail in those cases, but what was some of the reasoning and logic as to why someone else can use your name, that everyone knew was your name, someone else can use your story, that everyone knows your story, but you can't reap any benefit from this in a lawsuit, nor from a financial standpoint?
Well, it's really a two-way street with this. One is, in slavery, blacks weren't allowed to own their intellectual properties. We weren't allowed to have intellectual properties at all. The other thing is that not only was I suing the rapper for using my name, but I was also suing Universal Music Group. And we thought the Universal Music Group owed me about $50 million. So for a judge to take money from these good law-abiding citizens and give them to a two-bit street hustler who had just gotten out of prison, the judge, I don't think, was really too keen on that.
No, that makes a great deal of
because we felt that if we got to a jury, we almost knew that a jury would award me the money if we could get past the judge. But you have to get past motions before you can get to the jury.
Right. No, it makes sense. Now I know from other mediums, when you change gears from the hip hop space, TV show, right? We watch a lot of TV shows, and I've seen different shows where it's kind of an extension of your story. I think the most prominent right now is the most recent Snowfall episode show that ended on FX, where there's been stories about you were supposed to help work on it, you didn't work on it. Why didn't you necessarily pursue anything from a legal standpoint with that show, where the story is closely related to your story?
Well, for two reasons. One is, it take a lot of money to fight those companies. And the other one was, I didn't want to put my jailhouse plans on hold any longer. And I wanted to get busy with my, because I learned how to read while I was in jail.
Yeah, I think that's one of the coolest. That's one of the reasons I always look up to Malcolm X, of how much he read in prison, gets out of prison, and just changes the world.
Malcolm X's book was the first book I ever read.
Wow.
And when I read Malcolm's book, I saw myself in that book. And then I said, you know what? I can do what Malcolm did. And that's what I started working on. So I didn't want to put my plans on hold no more. And I didn't want to be tied up in a lawsuit, that may not go anywhere. And I thought that it was better to start putting my plans in action. So that's what I did.
I agree with you. And this is the last question we want to leave you with. Obviously, in our society now, you have people using your name. You have people making these shows. A lot of it is fantasy and fiction, a great deal, because some of those things just don't happen the way they portray on a television show. Could you actually talk to how much of, obviously you were in the game for a while, but the personal ramifications, the interpersonal conflict that comes with it, that's not always showed in the TV or the music that we see. Could you talk a little bit to that, or how it affected you personally?
With me, I never wanted to hurt anybody. I'm the type of person that I would rather help than hurt. So when I started to see the addiction, it started this pull with me. Like, why are you doing this? You're selling dope, hurting other people so that you can drive a car with nice wheels and a nice paint job, or wear a new pair of shoes. And that conflict got so strong that I could no longer deal with it, and I was able to quit selling drugs because of that conflict. I understood that I didn't want my mom's, smoking dope. I didn't want my sister smoking dope. I didn't want my brother smoking dope. Well, why would you sell to somebody else's mom, somebody else's brother, or somebody else's sister? And those are some issues that I could no longer deal with, and that allowed me to walk away from the game.
Wow, that's deep. And I think, what would your message be to, I guess, the younger generation who are utilizing technological platforms, whether it be the dark web or becoming threats from a cybersecurity standpoint, or even utilizing cryptocurrency to scam and scheme? What would your message be to some of those people who are engaging in that level of criminal activity on a technological space?
Well, there's so many ways out here that we can make money, that we have to find ways that don't hurt anybody else, don't take advantage of nobody else. And they're out here. And if you can manage a drug business, you can manage any business. All you have to do is give yourself time, because when you start selling drugs, you don't make money. You don't make money selling drugs until after you learn the business. So take the time out to learn whatever it is that you want to do, and then pick out something where you can earn the type of money that you want to earn.
Well, thank you so much for all the jewels and gems you dropped on us today, Mr. Ross. It was quite the pleasure having this conversation with you, just getting more perspective and scope into your life, and just being able to share this with my audience. So we greatly, greatly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to have this conversation. And thank you all for watching another episode of Culturally and Technically Legal, the show where we examine the intersections of culture, law, and technology. Today, we had an amazing guest, Mr. Freeway Rick Ross. Stay tuned for the next episodes. Thank you.